the content crashing and burning doesn't really matter as much anymore, which is why you see a lot more brands taking a lot more risks, especially in the B2C space. That mentality hasn't come into the B2B space as much yet.
Welcome to another episode of SmartCraft. I'm joined by Senior Social Strategist at Brightly Day, Anthony Newsome. We'll be talking about the resurgence of social organic, how you use it, how you get the best of it, and why it matters right now. We've seen organic social have resurgence, especially its adoption in B2B and its use. So we're interested in understanding more about it, and firstly asking the question, what is the point of social organic?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot, especially in the B2B world, brands have been very focused on lead generation because as marketing budgets get squeezed, you very quickly get towards the more pointy end of the marketing funnel. However, recently, I think with the changes that have been in organic social, mainly driven by TikTok, the algorithms have stopped looking at clout as a way of deciding where your content goes to and how much reach you get, and have started addressing content just on an individual basis. It's meant there's much greater opportunities for brands to get their content out there and to experiment more with content. So it's become a real great experimentation place for B2B brands to play with content and see what works for their audience.
And when you say clout, just to make sure I understand, we're talking Beyonce posts something, everyone sees it because it's Beyonce.
Yes.
And that has created some mega influencers. And you're saying that actually that clout, that I'm this person and therefore I command so many million and everyone's going to see my content, it's going to be surfaced above everything else. You're saying that's actually diminished in some way, that's lessened its impact?
To an extent. So brands in particular, focusing on them for a long time, when I was working initially back in social, you had to be quite conservative and protect your position in terms of a social brand, because your clout score, which were public for a while, would determine how much impressions you got from your content, and one piece of bad content would affect your clout score. So you really had to go for your greatest hits over and over again, and any experimentation was a big risk for brands because you would lose a lot of your reach and impressions for a long time afterwards based on one piece of bad content. Now that's changed gradually over time. However, it really changed massively with how TikTok came to the market and went, no, we're not doing that anymore. The way that they've architected their platform is by going, here's a load of really cool engaging content, we know a lot about you, our algorithm knows what sort of stuff that you engage with, therefore we're just going to serve you that, and it becomes this sort of massive dopamine hit for you when you scroll through the feed, because it knows what you and what you like. That's how it started approaching every piece of content that's put out there and gone, right, let's show this to a small group of people, 200, do they engage with it? If they don't, then it's not seen ever again. If they do, it goes to increasingly bigger and bigger audiences, and that's why any piece of content on TikTok can go viral. A lot of the other platforms, such as Meta, for example, have massively gone into Reels, and LinkedIn now have put in their vertical feed in sort of a Reel style as well. Since putting it in on Meta have seen a 27% increase in time on their app, and 80% of their interactions now are with the Reels feed. So that is a massive boom to sort of that's the content people want, and that's the content that brands are creating and content creators as well.
And I suppose that's a huge jump and spawned by TikTok and that change of algorithm, that change of approach. But then conversely, does that have it sounds fun. I can experiment, I can put stuff out there, and if it goes, it goes. But conversely, it means that, does it mean that I can have a lot of followers, I can have a lot of reach, and my post can still it can still drop off a cliff. Just because what I did yesterday reached Thunderdome, it doesn't mean today I'm going to get anywhere near that just because that content isn't right. It's not carrying clout through that.
The content crashing and burning doesn't really matter as much anymore, which is why you see a lot more brands taking a lot more risks, especially in the B2C space. That mentality hasn't come into the B2B space as much yet, especially in terms of there's far more of a focus on paid. Some brands are doing it very well in terms of experimentations in a B2B way, like Monzo and HubSpot are trying to do a lot more fun, engaging style content, and some of them flop and some of them do very well. But a lot of brands aren't seeing it as a space, one, to drive mass awareness, because you can do by getting viral, and keeping front of mind from a B2B point of view is so important, because you buy so irregularly in B2B, and when you do, it's usually because someone's told you need to do this thing now, And if you haven't got, you can only buy what's mentally available to you. If you're not mentally thinking about that company as an option and know what they do, you're out of the game before you've even started.
I think we've known social is the place to be. It's the place to put yourself front of mind. Organic social, you said, seeing the resurgence. It's a place where brands can exist, and B2B can, like you say, not sit in the middle, try and push yourself into either end of those to reach that audience, to engage that audience. That's where we're all spending all our time. So obviously it's important. Next question is, how do you do it well?
So doing organic social well, you kind of have to do three things. The first of all is having a clear purpose for it, and they're not a B2B, but Ryanair are the best articulation I've heard of having very sort of clear goals for their organic social. They have two goals. One is to reduce expectations to lower complaints, which is my favourite objective of any channel I've heard, and two, to stay top of mind for when people book flights. And when you look at their content through that lens, you can kind of see how they've done that amazingly with sort of taking the mick out of people who are complaining and then playing with that. And it's got to the point where like Americans are actively going out of their way to take Ryanair flights when they're on holiday in Europe and want them to come to America, and that's been so successful in that way. Having that clear purpose for your brand and going, this is what it's doing, and I'm not talking about lead generation, it's got to be something around perception, it's got to be something around getting in front of people and changing their mind about who you are as a company. The second thing you've got to do is you've got to have a personality. To stand out in social, you can't just say beige, bland things. You need to have a personality, a sense of humour. It is an entertainment channel, especially when you're looking at TikTok and the way that that's driving content. It's content consumption that essentially people are doing. So you've got to be entertained, because that's why you're there. We're there for little hits of dopamine. That's why it's addictive. That's why people are on there to consume content. And the third thing you've got to do is make your content either niche or novel. And that novel content is there to get your mass awareness and to drive engagement with your brand. And that niche content is there to show your expertise and get people into those real rabbit holes of content about what you do. And all that has to be wrapped up in the real art of social storytelling, which is very different to traditional storytelling in terms of TV adverts. You have to architect your story differently, and you have to really work the tips and tricks of psychology to make sure people consume your content.
So we obviously, when we talk, we reference TikTok a lot. We talk about that, obviously, probably because it was first, and it's made a lot of those changes, and it's led the charge on that, and that is trickling down. When we look at B2B and we look at LinkedIn, is it the same sort of application we should be expecting, or does it need to be nuanced from TikTok to LinkedIn, or that content there would work there?
It definitely does. The way that we've architected with a few brands now is using each channel to their strengths. So in terms of TikTok, we'd use that for like a lot of experimentation. So a lot of those psychological tricks and tips, and even with our own content, we'll look at cutting up these podcasts, for example, into loads of different ways and angles and approaches, using different colors, using different opening frames, and we'll test those all on TikTok. We then go, oh, here's the best one, and that one goes on to LinkedIn. We know that LinkedIn are going very much the same way as TikTok, but they're not the same volume of content being consumed. So the stuff we put up on there, we know that they want vertical video. We know that's the stuff that works well. We know from our own reporting what sort of psychological tricks and what sort of hooks to use. However, when we go put something out, we want it to have the best chance of doing well. So we often try it in TikTok with a lot more variance, put the best hit of those hits onto our Instagram and our LinkedIn, because we have far less shots of that. We'll then do additional cuts of those best hits for like other bits of content for LinkedIn going forward. But again, you do the same methodology of like, put those 4 best ones onto TikTok, see which one does best, and then elevate that one into LinkedIn. You see a lot better results by doing your experimentation in TikTok, where you're allowed to do a lot more content, it's far more free, and then putting your best hits into Instagram and LinkedIn, because they are less sort of in terms of content volume.
And when you talk about psychological tricks and tips, I suppose that is playing on the human behavior of the way they want to consume content and what grabs their attention. But are you talking about, you did a post on it I saw a while ago, which is like tell the beginning, the middle, the end, the middle, the beginning, the end, and this mashup of, it's not a linear story and a middle, beginning, and that's changed?
No, yes, the TikTok calls it unhinged storytelling, which is kind of how a traditional TV ad, I had explained once, a traditional TV ad used to be beginning, build up, and big reveal at the end. For social media, you kind of have that big reveal first, and then you tell the story that backfills that afterwards. There's lots of different tips and tricks, like you have to start with a strong hook and looking, a way of stopping people scrolling and grabbing their attention. As one, about simply grabbing attention, but two, establishing relevance with that audience. Go, oh, that is me. That is relevant to what I'm thinking and talking about. You'll see a lot of people address, especially in paid advertising, they'll address a specific audience, like, are you in finance? And like, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. And it's immediately ruling out the people that you don't want to be talking to and putting the relevance on people that you do.
So what's the intersection between organic social and paid social?
So aside from driving that awareness and keeping you top of mind, what organic can do as well is feed into paid in terms of, one, retargeting audience, and two, is testing for it. We've recently been doing a lot of work with organic into paid and testing a lot more content in organic. So either using TikTok or Instagram or even LinkedIn, and posting a lot of stuff up organically before we elevate it into paid, and seeing what content gets the most engagements or the most impressions, and then elevating that stuff into paid. One of our clients we recently just did a wrap-up report for yesterday, and the stuff that we elevated from organic into paid, when we started that methodology, we drove a 199% increase in site visits for them from that content alone, which and it's the same budgets. It's just by testing it out organically, we know it works, we know people engage with it. And a lot of the stuff we've done in paid before for clients ends up being quite big bets.
Yeah.
You have to do a lot of iterations of content and try and do a few different routes and see what works, and then try and iterate in flight. What doing stuff organically first does means you've kind of got some of your bankers in your bag and you know that this stuff is going to work. The problem is where a lot of companies are and a lot of B2Bs are, organic is over there, paid is over there in lead generation, demand generation, and bridging those gaps and getting those teams to work together is sort of part of the role and getting.
And that's quite the methodology, even to sort of explain to a client to go, look, I kind of need you to let me loose if you've got TikTok to go and try tons of stuff. I mean, this is based on audience research, understanding products, barriers, pain points, messaging frameworks. All of that needs to be done in advance, which is not a small task to do, because like you say, it needs to be based in truth and authenticity. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go make a load of mess over in TikTok and just try a load of stuff out and go crazy.
Yeah.
I'm then going to move that into potentially Reels and LinkedIn and take the best performers and put them into that world. And then when I think that's working, I'm then going to go and elevate that into paid. That's quite a journey, but you say something like 200% increase in, it's a huge difference when you suddenly go, I'm now paying for this. And actually, well, I'm paying for the eyeballs, and it really matters. So if I didn't do any of that, I'm doing my messaging, my audience research, and then just throwing it in there, putting money behind it, and hoping that because I'm in front of someone, that they're going to have a reaction to it, they're going to create a connection to it.
Yeah, and getting started with it, I think, is the hardest part for brands, because they see this as it's a whole new methodology, and there's a lot of stuff you have to do initially to get stuff off the ground. Not in terms of, doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of upfront investment. You can just start small, and you can start by testing a few things out, but you do need to build on it iteratively, and you do need to have the commitment to going, this is a long-term thing we're doing. So the way it works best is when brands see their paid as always on and their organic as always on, and they have a single-minded proposition and strategy for their organic, and these are the things we're trying to do with our organic. These are the key campaigns and the key products we're trying to run in paid, and we're just going to run those because they are our products and that is what we're trying to do. Yeah. And then you see when you kind of got those in a space of going all the time, you see some really lovely crossover of organic into paid, then also paid back into organic, going, oh, that's worked better, and we did another iteration of that in paid, so we should do more stuff on that in organic. And you start seeing the interconnection between that stuff as well. Even when you bring in paid search and organic search on the other side of things, you end up seeing some really lovely trends, both in the research stage of things and the planning, also in the results of going, hang on, that's a query that we haven't really thought about in terms of the angle into it. And then you can use those angles for social ads, because the lines between social and search and where people are looking for information has massively changed. Yeah. And they are searching on TikTok, searching on Instagram. So, and if that's what people are worried about, you can then use that for sort of hooks into your content or different angles to go in. Having that interconnected ecosystem, I think, is the space that all sort of B2Bs and B2Cs need to be in terms of getting in front of the consumer's mind, really speaking their language and speaking to their pain points and testing out in the real world, because people don't behave unfortunately, like the research always tells us they do.
So there's some great advice there. What do you think is overlooked in organic social at the moment?
In organic, we're fixated on TikTok, and I know we've talked a lot about TikTok in this podcast, but that's where the trends are coming from. The thing that we often overlook, everyone's obsessed with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I think we overlook the audiences with more financial clout, which is maybe your Gen X and boomers probably at this point, are the audiences that have a lot more sort of financial spending power, and also have kind of their own language in terms of social media and how they use it and different platforms they use. And I think brands and agencies don't pay enough focus to what's the individual language spoken on those channels. Doing memes about Brat Girl Summer isn't going to work if I'm targeting Gen X or, or boomers.
Yeah. No one I know knew what the hell that was about.
Oh, I know my age knew what Brat Summer was. It's a very Gen Z moment. But investigating your audience's language and your audience's world and what memes and what sort of style of content they're used to seeing their world means that you can blend in with their feed better. And I know that we talk a lot about standing out and getting that stop in the feed, but blending in terms of the language and not looking overtly like an ad or looking like a piece of sort of company content is incredibly important, because you will mentally be able to tell in nanoseconds it's an ad a lot of the time. You can play this game in your own feed and you will notice you've skipped it before you even go, 'cause you know it's an ad, you know it's an ad, you know it's an ad. The best pieces of content, and often a lot of the content we share internally here, are the ones where you get to the end of it and you realise it's an ad and you're like, oh, damn it, that's brilliant! And the reveal is, or the TV star reveal is often the product then, and you're like, but I've gone on the whole journey of how this brand is useful in someone else's world. And that's, I think, the thing we also don't do from a B2B or an agency point of view is make brands supporting act in other people's stories. I think that's where creators are doing very well, and employee content is doing brilliantly. One, because it's quite authentic, but two, because it's realistic. Brands want to say, we do this, we do that, and someone coined the phrase of weeing all over their content. And no one is interested in you. Social is about me as an individual and what I am, and kind of empathizing with other people's stories, and how a brand was useful in someone else's story is a far more compelling way of selling a product, because you're like, oh, I've got the use case. I know exactly, my mental model now is that brand is, that's how I do this task. That's the thing that enables it. And I've also invested in this person's story because it's very compelling, and we love people's stories. That's how society works. So doing that a bit more, and brands going, I'm not saying what we do and what our features are and this is a cool new thing. Going, no, how am I useful to other people? What's the use cases that's in, and how can I get people to tell that story in a compelling way? That gets people to consume your content. That gets people to go to the mental model. That's what they do. So when it does come like, I need a cybersecurity expert, I know exactly where I'm going to begin with.
Which I suppose, even when we go the power of AI and being able to create content at speed, cinematic, aesthetically beautiful, it becomes another trick if there isn't a story there, if it isn't thought about, if there isn't a strategy, if we haven't done a testing framework that gets us to the point of that's the best thing we can say to that audience in the best possible way. Yes,
I think there's been a mindset a little bit in terms of social media as well, which is like, just put it out there, put loads of stuff out there. We need to get so much volume out, and yes, you can, but do it with a purpose. We do a lot of reports here. One of the competitors the other week on LinkedIn, the other month on LinkedIn, had posted over 250 times, which is an average of 7 times a day.
Wow.
And you're like, and it's
you can't have that,
and it's a volume. It all looks roughly the same, and you can't say anything, and it doesn't stand out, and you can tell nothing's had the time spent on it. And there's very few posts there that got a lot of engagement. Conversely, another competitor had posted 18 times and done far, far better in terms of follower growth and engagement. I think there's a balance between, you can't just do one thing a year anymore and go, that's our one thing for the year and that's going to hit all our sales. I mean, you can, but it's a bold strategy. You have to do create a volume of content, but create it with a purpose, and don't just go, we're going to say absolutely everything and something will work. It's not, you're you are going to spam people after a while, especially on LinkedIn, posting 7 times a day. That's going to be a bit too much.
Great. Anthony, thank you. That's phenomenal advice. Really interesting. I hope the audience have found it as interesting as I have. And I'll tap you up for the next one.
Thanks. I'm contractually obliged to be here.